The library was silent except for the sound of rain against the windows. Rowan stood frozen, his reflection ghosting across the glass as thunder rumbled in the distance. She turned to face him, and her voice was steady despite the tears. "You want to know why I never told you about her?" she asked. "Because you weren't there, Rowan. You were never there." His daughter, 5 years old, sitting in the next room with ocean eyes that mirrored his own. He opened his mouth but nothing came out. Sometimes the truths that destroy us arrive dressed in wedding invitations. Welcome back to another powerful story, my beloved listeners. Kindly tell where you're watching from and what time it is where you're at. If you're new here, prepare for a story of betrayal, unexpected love, and what truly makes a family. Drop everything and listen closely. This tale of heartbreak and redemption might just change how you view love and family forever. Some men build empires to fill the void where love once lived. Rowan Castellano understood power the way other men understood breathing. At 36, he commanded rooms with a glance and moved markets with a signature. His private equity empire stretched across 3 continents, valued at numbers that made government officials nervous and competitors sleepless. The view from his penthouse office overlooking the Thames was a constellation of conquered territories. Each building in the financial district represented a victory. Each landmark a reminder of everything he had achieved through sheer force of will and strategic ruthlessness. But the ivory envelope resting on his mahogany desk commanded more attention than the entire glittering landscape below. His assistant had placed it there an hour ago, and he had been staring at it ever since. The return address was printed in elegant calligraphy. Tobias Sterling, his best friend since Oxford. The brother he had chosen rather than inherited. 20 years of friendship that had survived brutal business competition, personal betrayals, and the kind of honesty that either destroyed relationships or forged them into something unbreakable. Rowan picked up the envelope and turned it over in his hands. Tobias had called 3 weeks ago with news of his engagement. The conversation had been brief, almost curt. "I am getting married," Tobias had said. 3 weeks from now. I want you as my best man." Of course, Rowan had replied without hesitation. "Who is she?" "You will meet her at the rehearsal dinner. Trust me, brother. You will understand everything when you see her." That response should have been his first warning. Rowan opened the envelope and pulled out the invitation. Heavy cardstock that probably cost more per sheet than most people earned in a day. Gold foil lettering that caught the afternoon light. Every detail screamed of recently acquired wealth being deployed with precision. "Tobias Sterling requests the honor of your presence at his marriage ceremony." The date was in 3 days. The venue was a private estate in the Cotswolds. But nowhere on the invitation did it mention the bride's name. Rowan reached for his phone and dialed. Tobias answered on the second ring. "I received the invitation," Rowan said. "Good. You are still coming? I am your best man." "Of course I am coming. But Tobias, why all the secrecy about your bride?" There was a pause. Long enough to make Rowan's instincts bristle with unease. "Some introductions require the right setting," Tobias said finally. "Trust me. I do trust you. That is why I am asking. 3 days, brother. Just 3 more days. Then everything will make sense." After they disconnected, Rowan stood at the windows and watched London's evening lights begin to ignite below. He had built his entire career on reading situations, anticipating moves, controlling variables before they could become threats. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was walking into something he could not predict. His reflections stared back at him from the glass. Sharp features that genetics and discipline had refined into something approaching masculine perfection. Dark hair with distinguished silver at the temples. Grey eyes that made opponents reconsider their strategies mid-negotiation. Success had carved him into exactly what the world demanded. Powerful. Untouchable. Alone. The thought arrived unbidden, and he pushed it away with practiced efficiency. He had everything he needed. An empire that generated wealth while he slept. Influence that opened any door. Respect that preceded him into every room. What he did not have was the one thing he had destroyed 6 years ago when he chose ambition over love. Her name whispered through his mind like a ghost that refused to stay buried. Vivienne. 6 years ago. The charity auction had been one of dozens he attended each year. Social obligation disguised as philanthropy. Networking opportunities wrapped in evening wear and champagne. He had been 30, already on his way to building something significant. Driven. Focused. Absolutely certain that emotional attachments were luxuries he could not afford. Then he saw her paintings. They were displayed in the gallery's east wing, and they stopped him mid-stride. Abstract pieces that somehow captured human emotion with such raw honesty that viewing them felt invasive. Like witnessing someone's therapy session without permission. The colors were violent and tender at once. Reds that screamed rage. Blues that whispered grief. Golds that hummed with hope barely remembered. "They make you uncomfortable," a voice said beside him. He turned and forgot how to breathe. She stood there with a glass of champagne and a smile that rewrote his understanding of beauty. Dark hair that fell past her shoulders. Amber eyes that seemed to see through armor he had spent years constructing. A green dress that was neither expensive nor cheap, just perfectly her. "Good," she continued. "Art should disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed." "And which category do I fall into?" he asked, already knowing he would pursue her with the same ruthless focus he applied to billion-pound acquisitions. "Both," she replied, studying him with unnerving perception. "You are successful enough to be comfortable. But something tells me you have not felt peace in years." She was right, of course. "I am Rowan," he said, extending his hand. "Vivienne," she replied, and when their palms touched he felt electricity arc between them. They talked for 3 hours. First at the auction, then at a coffee shop that stayed open late, then walking along the Thames as dawn began to color the sky. She was an artist who approached the world with fierce independence. She painted emotion because she believed people spent too much time hiding what they felt. She lived in a tiny flat in Shoreditch and survived on commission work and teaching art to children on weekends. "You build empires," she said as they watched the sunrise paint the river gold. "I paint feelings. We could not be more different. Or more compatible," he replied, and meant it. For 8 months, Vivienne made him believe he could be something other than the cold strategist his father had trained him to become. She introduced him to poetry, to museums he had walked past 1,000 times without entering, to lazy Sunday mornings where the world's demands could not reach them. She looked at him like he mattered beyond his bank balance or business connections. Like the man beneath the empire was worth knowing. And he loved her with an intensity that terrified him. Because love meant vulnerability. Love meant dependency. Love meant risking the kind of emotional devastation that had destroyed his parents' marriage and left scars he still carried. His father had loved his mother once. Then that love had curdled into resentment when she could not handle the isolation that came with building dynasties. She had medicated her loneliness with prescription pills until one night she took too many. Rowan had been 19 when he found her. After that, he had sworn never to let emotion compromise his judgment. Never to need someone so much that losing them could break him. But Vivienne made him forget those promises. Until the Singapore deal. The argument started on a Tuesday evening in her flat. He had just received confirmation that the acquisition was moving forward. 3 months in Singapore to oversee the integration. The deal that would cement his position as Europe's most feared investor. "I leave Friday," he said, still reading emails on his phone. Vivienne was at her easel, working on a piece that featured storms and sunlight fighting for dominance. She did not look up. How long? 3 months. Maybe 4. Her brush stilled. Then she set it down carefully and turned to face him. 4 months. It is a complicated deal. The timeline is aggressive but necessary. Rowan, we have been together for 8 months. In that entire time, you have never prioritized us over work. Not once. "That is not fair," he said, but his voice lacked conviction because she was right. She crossed the small space between them. Her amber eyes were already filling with tears. "I am asking you to choose," she said quietly. "Choose me. Just once. Choose me over the next deal." The panic hit him like a physical force. She was asking for something impossible. Asking him to prove she mattered more than everything he had built. Asking him to be vulnerable in a way that felt like standing on a cliff edge without safety equipment. "You are asking me to choose between you and everything I have worked for," he said, the words emerging cold and precise despite the fear clawing at his chest. "That is not fair. You knew who I was when we started this. "I knew who you are," she replied, and now the tears were falling freely. "I just hoped you would want to become who you could be. But you are right. I cannot compete with your empire. I will not beg someone to love me enough to stay." Vivienne. Go to Singapore, Rowan. Build your empire. I hope it keeps you warm at night. He left for Singapore the next morning. For 3 months, he told himself she would cool down, that she would realize she was being unreasonable. He sent flowers, expensive gifts, messages that tried to explain without actually apologizing or changing anything fundamental. She never responded. When he returned, prepared to win her back with the kind of persistent campaign he would use on a reluctant business partner, she was gone. Her flat stood empty. Her phone number was disconnected. Her gallery representation claimed ignorance of her whereabouts. It was as if Vivienne Cross had simply ceased to exist. He told himself it was for the best. Their relationship had been a beautiful distraction, but ultimately incompatible with the life he was building. So he buried himself deeper in work. Built his empire higher. Pretended the hollow feeling in his chest was victory rather than grief. 6 years passed. And now Tobias was getting married to a mysterious bride he refused to name. Rowan's instincts were screaming that something was coming. Something that would force him to confront truths he had spent years avoiding. He just did not know how right those instincts were. The morning of the wedding arrived with a kind of pristine beauty that money could orchestrate but never truly buy. Rowan's driver navigated the tree-lined approach to the Cotswolds estate as Saturday's golden afternoon light transformed the landscape into something almost painfully beautiful. The estate sprawled across 200 acres of manicured perfection. Honey-colored stone. Gothic revival architecture that commanded attention. Gardens that could have inspired romantic poetry. He had arrived early, using the excuse of best man duties to mask his growing unease about the identity of Tobias's bride. The rehearsal dinner had been cancelled. Last-minute complication, Tobias had said. "We will make introductions at the ceremony itself." The estate's interior had been transformed into something approaching a cathedral. Soaring ceilings draped in enough white silk to outfit a fleet of sailing ships. Flowers cascading from every available surface in arrangements that probably cost more than luxury cars. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across walls lined with enough candles to illuminate a small city. Everything glittered and gleamed with the kind of aggressive beauty that demanded attention rather than earning it. Rowan moved through the space with a controlled grace that made his physical presence as commanding as his business reputation. His bespoke tuxedo fit with a precision that only true craftsmanship achieved. Guests were beginning to arrive. He recognized venture capitalists whose decisions could make or break entire companies. Media moguls whose opinions shaped public discourse. Socialites whose approval granted access to circles that money alone could not penetrate. Everyone who mattered in the overlapping circles of technology, finance, and social influence had been assembled. "Rowan Castellano is the best man," he heard someone murmur as he passed. "Sterling must be closer to him than we realized." He acknowledged the comment with a slight nod and continued toward the altar where Tobias stood waiting. His best friend looked nervous. More nervous than Rowan had ever seen him, including before their first major deal presentation at Oxford. "Brother," Tobias said, gripping his hand with more force than necessary. "Thank you for being here. Where else would I be?" Tobias smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "You are about to understand everything. And I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you." Before Rowan could ask what that meant, the coordinator signaled that they needed to take their positions. The ceremony was about to begin. The garden entrance opened, and Rowan's entire world tilted on an axis that would never fully right itself again. She walked in holding the hand of a little girl, and even from across the room, even after 6 years, even though every rational part of his brain insisted it could not possibly be her, he knew. Vivienne. Time collapsed into a singularity where past and present merged with gravitational force. She moved through the assembled guests with quiet confidence that 6 years ago had still been developing, now fully realized into something approaching regal authority. The sage green dress made her amber eyes luminous. Her dark hair was swept into an elegant arrangement that exposed the graceful column of her neck. But it was her bearing that truly arrested him. The Vivienne he had known had possessed fierce independence and artistic passion, but there had also been vulnerability. Moments of uncertainty that made her human and approachable. The woman crossing the reception area carried herself like royalty. Not through arrogance, but through the absolute certainty of someone who had survived trials and emerged stronger. His heart was performing gymnastics his doctors would find medically concerning. His hands had begun trembling. She is here. At Tobias's wedding. Then his gaze dropped to the child beside her, and the world stopped spinning entirely. The little girl could not have been more than 5 years old. Miniature formal dress. Dark curls pulled back with a velvet ribbon. Natural grace that marked some children as destined for extraordinary futures. But it was her face that stopped his breath. She had his eyes. Those distinctive ocean eyes that genetics had passed through Castellano generations like a family signature. His sharp cheekbones. The stubborn set to her jaw that he recognized from every photograph of himself as a child. The way she tilted her head when observing something that caught her interest. A gesture he had been told was his most distinctive mannerism. The mathematical certainty hit him with the force of a financial collapse. 6 years since he had last seen Vivienne. This child appeared to be approximately 5 years old. The timeline was undeniable. The physical resemblance was unmistakable. Dear God. I have a daughter. The realization detonated through his consciousness like a controlled demolition, bringing down every assumption about his life with systematic thoroughness. All the years he had spent building his empire, convinced he was alone in the world. All the times he had told himself he was better off without the vulnerability that family represented. And the entire time, he had had a child. A daughter who carried his DNA, his features, possibly his temperament and intelligence. A little girl who had grown through infancy, toddlerhood, early childhood, all without him. First words he had never heard. First steps he had never witnessed. Birthdays uncelebrated. Bedtime stories unread. 5 years of her life had passed while he had been oblivious to her existence. Rowan, Tobias said beside him, his voice tight with concern. Rowan, breathe. He realized he had stopped breathing entirely. Who, he managed to say, his voice emerging with barely controlled intensity, is the woman who just entered with the little girl? Even as he asked, pieces were clicking into place with horrifying clarity. Tobias's mysterious bride. His insistence that some introductions required the right setting. The rehearsal dinner cancellation. This entire wedding had been orchestrated toward a moment of revelation that Rowan was living through in excruciating slow motion. That, Tobias said with careful gentleness, is Vivienne. My bride. And the child's name is Iris. Iris. His daughter had a name. A beautiful name that Vivienne had chosen without him. Had whispered in moments of tenderness he had never witnessed. Had called out across playgrounds and bedrooms and all the ordinary extraordinary moments of childhood that he had missed entirely. The betrayal was so complete, so multifaceted, that Rowan's mind struggled to process its full dimensions. His best friend was marrying his ex-girlfriend. The woman Rowan had never fully stopped loving despite 6 years of deliberate suppression. The same woman who had hidden the existence of their daughter through Iris's entire life. Did you know? The question emerged with lethal quiet. The tone Rowan used when he was 3 seconds from systematically destroying someone's entire professional existence. Did you know about Iris when you started pursuing Vivienne? Yes, Tobias replied, meeting his gaze with steady honesty. I have known since I met her 2 years ago. She told me everything. 2 years. His best friend had known about his daughter for 2 years and said nothing. Had actively pursued a relationship with the mother of Rowan's child while maintaining their friendship as if nothing significant was occurring. Before you finish whatever you are about to say, Tobias interrupted, his voice carrying steel beneath the surface courtesy, you should know that Vivienne tried to tell you. Multiple times. You were unreachable, Rowan. She sent letters to your office that your assistant screened. She called your private line and got redirected to voicemail you never checked. She even flew to Singapore and was informed by your security that you had left instructions not to be disturbed under any circumstances. The words hit like precision strikes. Each one backed by evidence that Rowan's systematic isolation had consequences beyond his professional efficiency. He had created layers of protection to ensure uninterrupted focus on his work, never considering that someone might need to reach him with information that transcended business concerns. She spent months trying to contact you, Tobias continued, his tone gentling slightly. And when she finally accepted that you had truly disappeared from her life, she made the decision to raise Iris alone. She did not hide your daughter out of malice, brother. She protected her from a father who had already demonstrated that his work mattered more than the people who loved him. The assessment was brutal and accurate, supported by evidence Rowan could not refute. He had made himself unreachable. He had prioritized business over everything else. He had created the circumstances that resulted in Vivienne's decision to proceed without him. But knowing he bore responsibility did not make the loss any less devastating. Across the reception area, Vivienne had noticed his presence. Her posture shifted almost imperceptibly, body language transitioning from relaxed to defensive in the space of a heartbeat. She bent to say something to Iris, who nodded with the solemn understanding of children who had been prepared for difficult situations. Then Vivienne began moving toward them with a kind of inevitable momentum that marked people approaching confrontations they could no longer avoid. She was even more beautiful than his memory had preserved. 6 years having refined her features into something approaching artwork. But it was her eyes that destroyed him. Those amber eyes that had once looked at him with such love and trust, now carrying the weight of 6 years' worth of single motherhood and justified resentment. "Rowan," she said as she reached them, his name emerging from her lips with careful neutrality. "I was not certain you would actually attend." Tobias neglected to mention who he was marrying, Rowan replied, fighting to keep his voice level despite the emotional hurricane currently destroying his internal landscape. "Had I known, I do not know what I would have done." "Exactly," Vivienne said with surgical precision, her words cutting through his attempted diplomacy like a scalpel through tissue. "You never know what to do when human relationships complicate your perfectly controlled life. Some things never change." The little girl, Iris, his daughter, dear God, had followed Vivienne at a careful distance, watching the adult interaction with intelligent observation that marked exceptional children. She possessed Vivienne's grace and what appeared to be his analytical intensity, a combination that would someday make her either extraordinary or dangerous. Possibly both. "Is that him?" Iris asked, her voice carrying the careful pronunciation of a child who had been taught to speak clearly and thoughtfully. "The man from the photographs?" Photographs. Vivienne had kept photographs of him, had shown them to their daughter despite his absence. The revelation struck him with unexpected force. She could have erased him completely from Iris's life, could have invented a more convenient fiction about her father's identity. Instead, she had preserved his image in whatever context she had created for their daughter's understanding of her origins. "Yes," Vivienne replied, her gaze never leaving Rowan's face as she answered their child. "This is Rowan Castellano. Your biological father." Biological father. Not your father or daddy. Clinical terminology that established distance between DNA and relationship, between genetics and family. The distinction was deliberate and devastatingly effective, communicating exactly where he stood in their lives. Acknowledged as a genetic contributor, but not recognized as a parent in any meaningful sense. The processional music began to swell. Guests rose with synchronized precision, turning their attention toward the entrance where the wedding party would soon appear. Rowan remained standing at the altar beside Tobias, his body operating on autopilot while his mind spiraled through the wreckage of everything he thought he understood about his life. From his vantage point, he had an unobstructed view of where Vivienne sat with Iris in the third row. Their heads bent together as Vivienne whispered something that made their daughter smile. The intimacy of the moment excluded him completely. He was an observer of a relationship he had never known existed, a stranger to the family he had unknowingly created. When the music shifted to signal the bride's entrance, the assembled crowd turned as one toward the main doors. And Vivienne Cross walked down the aisle toward the man she had chosen to build a future with. The man who was not him. Her wedding gown was a masterpiece. Silk and lace that had been constructed with an artist's eye for beauty and form. The train stretched behind her, managed by attendants who moved with practiced precision. Diamonds adorned her throat and wrists, catching the light like captured stars. But it was her expression that revealed the true nature of this performance. Beneath the radiant smile that photographers would capture for posterity, Rowan detected something else entirely. Cold satisfaction. The look of someone who had planned this moment with meticulous care. This was not the face of a woman overwhelmed by love and joy on her wedding day. This was the expression of a general surveying a conquered battlefield. As she glided past him, Her gaze met his for one suspended moment that contained multitudes of unspoken communication. He saw acknowledgement of their shared past, recognition of the child they had created, and absolute certainty that she had moved beyond the damage he had caused into a future he could observe but never fully share. This, her expression communicated with devastating clarity, is what you chose to lose. Watch me marry a better man. The ceremony proceeded with flawless execution. Every word had been carefully chosen. Every gesture rehearsed to perfection. Every moment choreographed to communicate the desired message about love, commitment, and happily ever after. The officiant delivered his remarks with polished professionalism. But Rowan's attention remained fractured, divided between the ceremony unfolding before him and the little girl sitting in the third row with his eyes. Do you, Tobias, take Vivienne to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, Tobias replied. His voice carried genuine emotion. This was not performance for him. This was real. Do you, Vivienne, take Tobias to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, Vivienne responded with enough enthusiasm for both participants, her voice carrying victorious satisfaction. The kiss that sealed their marriage lasted exactly long enough to satisfy photographic requirements and no longer. When they turned to face the applauding crowd as husband and wife, Tobias's gaze immediately sought Rowan's position. Something in his expression suggested that his wedding day was becoming the catalyst for realizations he had spent years avoiding. Confrontations with truths he had deliberately buried beneath layers of success and distraction. Ladies and gentlemen, the officiant announced with flourishing grandeur, I present to you, Mr. and Mrs. Tobias Sterling. The applause that erupted from the assembled crowd was thunderous. Cameras flashed with paparazzi intensity, capturing every moment for posterity and social media dissemination. Vivienne practically glowed with satisfaction as she acknowledged the acclaim. Her dreams of something Rowan could not quite define finally realized in the most public way possible. But as the newlyweds processed down the aisle to triumphant music, Rowan noticed that Tobias's attention remained fractured. His gaze returning repeatedly to where Rowan stood, and to where Iris sat, watching everything with intelligent ocean eyes that mirrored the man she did not know was her father. The reception area had been transformed into something approaching a Renaissance palace. Gold leaf and crystal in quantities that could stock a royal treasury. Tables draped in silk. Flowers arranged with botanical precision. Every detail calculated to communicate wealth, taste, and social position. Rowan moved through the crowd with fluid grace, his presence creating ripples of recognition among the assembled titans of industry. Business associates approached with a mixture of deference and ambition that powerful people inspired. Rowan, you look magnificent, Margaret Chen Winters said. The wife of a tech venture capitalist whose approval could make or break entire companies. That tuxedo is stunning. Custom. Naturally. Naturally, Rowan replied with understated confidence. The compliment carried deeper meaning that Margaret would decode later. That Rowan Castellano had just classified this wedding as worthy of his most exclusive attention. In the circles where they traveled, such distinctions mattered enormously. Your presence here is quite the statement, Margaret continued, her tone probing delicately. I had not realized you were so close to the Sterling family. Tobias and I have been friends since Oxford, Rowan said. 20 years of brotherhood. And the bride? I must confess, I know very little about her background. Vivienne Cross, Rowan replied, his voice carefully neutral. An art consultant. Quite successful in her field. What he did not say was that she was the woman who had once made him believe he could be something other than the cold strategist his father had trained him to become. What he did not say was that she was the mother of his child. What he did not say was that watching her marry another man felt like being slowly dismantled from the inside out. Noel remained close to her mother's side throughout the reception, absorbing everything with quiet intelligence. At 5 years old, she possessed the kind of preternatural awareness that allowed her to navigate complex social situations without fully understanding their underlying dynamics. Her natural grace drew admiring glances from adults who recognized quality when they encountered it. Your daughter is absolutely beautiful, Margaret said to Vivienne when their paths crossed near the champagne fountain. Those eyes are remarkable. So intelligent and expressive. Vivienne's hand instinctively moved to rest on Iris's shoulder. A protective gesture. Thank you, she replied with genuine warmth. She is extraordinary. She inherited her father's eyes, Vivienne added deliberately, watching as understanding dawned in Margaret's expression. Because everyone in their industry knew about Rowan Castellano's distinctive ocean eyes. The kind of piercing intelligence that had helped him build a tech empire before his 35th birthday. Margaret's gaze moved between Vivienne, Iris, and where Rowan stood across the reception area. The mathematical certainty was unmistakable. "Oh," Margaret said quietly. "Oh my." Rowan stood at the edge of the reception, champagne untouched in his hand, watching the head table where Tobias sat beside Vivienne with Iris between them. They looked like a family, complete without him. Iris was absorbed in arranging the flowers from the centerpiece into mathematical patterns. Her small hands moving with focused precision that Rowan recognized from his own childhood. She possessed his analytical mind paired with Vivienne's artistic sensibility. Tobias leaned down to answer one of Iris's questions with patient attention. Vivienne's hand rested on Tobias's arm with casual intimacy. The easy synchronization between them spoke of genuine connection rather than performance. 5 years, Rowan thought. 5 years of moments like this that I missed entirely. 5 birthday parties. First words. First steps. The first time she wrote her name. Her first day of school. Every milestone, every triumph, every moment of simple joy. He had been building his empire while his daughter was learning to walk. Acquiring companies while she was learning to read. Closing deals while she was developing the personality and interests that made her uniquely herself. "You are staring," a voice said beside him. Margaret had materialized at his elbow, her expression carrying perceptive intelligence. "The little girl at the head table," she continued quietly. "She has your eyes, Rowan. Anyone paying attention would notice." He should have deflected. Should have deployed the smooth social skills that had navigated countless delicate situations. Instead, the truth emerged with uncharacteristic honesty. "She is my daughter," he said. "I only discovered her existence 3 hours ago." Margaret's expression shifted through surprise to understanding to what might have been sympathy. "Vivienne Cross's child," she said carefully. "I had heard rumors she had a daughter, but no one seemed to know the father's identity. This must be complicated." "Complicated is a British understatement applied to a Greek tragedy," Rowan replied. He drained his champagne with uncharacteristic lack of restraint. "The woman I never stopped loving is marrying my best friend," he continued, his voice low enough that only Margaret could hear. "And I have just learned I have a 5-year-old daughter who considers me a stranger. What will you do?" The question hung in the air between them. What would he do? His entire adult life had been built on systematic control, strategic planning, the ruthless pursuit of defined objectives. But this situation defied the frameworks that had brought him success in every other arena. He could not acquire Vivienne like a struggling company, could not negotiate custody of Iris like a business merger, could not deploy the tactics that had built his empire without destroying the very relationships he desperately wanted to salvage. "I have no idea," he admitted. Before Margaret could respond, Tobias appeared at his elbow. His expression carried serious intensity that marked important conversations. "We need to talk," Tobias said quietly. "Vivienne has agreed to join us." "The library. 5 minutes." Rowan nodded. As Tobias walked away, Rowan felt his chest constrict with something that might have been panic or hope or grief. All three, probably. In 5 minutes, he would face the woman he had destroyed and the best friend who had claimed everything Rowan had been too proud to fight for. In 5 minutes, the reckoning would begin. And Rowan Castellano, who had conquered financial markets across 3 continents and built an empire that made governments nervous, had absolutely no idea how to navigate the most important negotiation of his life. Because this was not about money or power or influence. This was about a little girl with ocean eyes who deserved better than a father who had been absent for her entire existence. This was about a woman who had built a life from the ruins he had left behind. This was about whether a man who had spent 36 years running from vulnerability could find the courage to become someone worthy of a second chance he had done nothing to earn. The reception continued around him. Laughter and music and the performance of celebration. But Rowan stood alone, watching his daughter arrange flowers into Fibonacci spirals, and wondered if redemption was even possible for someone who had destroyed everything that mattered in pursuit of things that ultimately meant nothing at all. The library smelled of leather and old wood and rain that had started falling against the windows. Rowan stood just inside the doorway, watching as Vivienne positioned herself by the fireplace with her arms crossed. She had changed from her wedding gown into something simpler. A cream-colored dress that made her look softer than the bride who had walked down the aisle 2 hours ago. But her eyes held no softness at all. Tobias closed the door behind them, sealing the three of them into a space that suddenly felt too small for the weight of everything that needed to be said. "Before anyone speaks," Vivienne began, her voice carrying the kind of absolute authority that ended arguments before they began, "I want to establish the boundaries of this conversation. What happened between us 6 years ago is ancient history. I am not interested in relitigating the past, assigning blame, or entertaining emotional appeals about what might have been." "Vivienne," Rowan started, but she silenced him with a look that could have frozen nitrogen. "I am not finished. Iris is my primary concern. My only concern in any discussion about your potential role in her life. She is brilliant, sensitive, and secure in a family that has always prioritized her well-being. Any relationship you pursue with her will be on my terms, at my pace, and subject to immediate termination if I determine it is causing her harm." The terms were absolute, delivered with the finality of a queen establishing laws for her kingdom. Rowan recognized the tone from boardrooms where powerful people drew lines that could not be crossed without consequences. She was offering access, but on a foundation of her complete control. He would be a visitor in his daughter's life rather than a parent with equal standing. "I accept your terms," he said, the words emerging before his pride could construct objections. "I want to know her, Vivienne. I want to be part of her life in whatever capacity you will allow." "Why?" The question emerged sharp as a blade. "Why now, Rowan? You have built an empire on the foundations of emotional isolation. You have systematically eliminated every vulnerability from your life. What makes you think you are capable of being a father?" The accusation was accurate and devastating, supported by evidence he could not refute. He had constructed his life around the systematic elimination of emotional risk. Had convinced himself that the kind of messy, complicated love that family required was incompatible with the focused intensity that built empires. "I do not know if I am capable," he admitted, the confession emerging with painful honesty. "I have no template for healthy fatherhood. No experience with the kind of daily devotion that raising a child requires. My own father was brilliant and successful and completely emotionally unavailable, and I have spent my entire adult life becoming exactly what he raised me to be." He paused, forcing himself to maintain eye contact despite the urge to retreat behind his usual professional mask. "But I want to try. I want to become someone worthy of being in Iris's life. And I am asking you to give me the opportunity to prove I can be something more than the man who walked away 6 years ago." Vivienne studied him with unnerving intensity. Those amber eyes cataloguing micro-expressions and body language with a kind of perceptive intelligence that had always made lying to her impossible. The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable, thick with the weight of 6 years' worth of accumulated history. "Tobias knows," she said finally, her gaze shifting to include the man she had just married. "He has known about you since our 3rd date. I do not keep secrets from the people I love, which is apparently a standard you never mastered." The barb struck precisely as intended. Acknowledging that she had moved beyond the damaged relationship they had shared into something healthier with a man who had proven his trustworthiness through consistent presence rather than dramatic gestures. "I love Vivienne," Tobias said, his voice carrying quiet certainty of absolute truth. "And I love Iris like she is my own daughter, because in every way that matters beyond genetics, she is. But I am not trying to erase you from their lives, brother. I am the one who convinced Vivienne to tell you about Iris's existence." Rowan's head snapped toward his best friend, surprise breaking through his emotional devastation. "You convinced her?" "She wanted to wait," Tobias confirmed, his expression serious. "Wanted to spare Iris the disruption of having a biological father suddenly appear in her life. But I argued that you deserved to know. That Iris deserved the option of knowing you, even if the relationship never develops into something meaningful." The revelation recontextualized everything, forcing Rowan to confront the uncomfortable reality that Tobias had been the ethical actor in this entire situation. He had pursued a relationship with transparency, advocated for Rowan's parental rights even when it complicated his own family dynamics, consistently prioritized Iris's long-term well-being over his own comfort. "He has been more of a brother to me than I deserved," Rowan thought. "And I have spent the past 3 hours resenting him for building the family I was too proud to claim." What does Iris know about me? Rowan asked, redirecting his attention to Vivienne. What have you told her? The truth, Vivienne replied simply. That her biological father and I were in a relationship that ended before I knew I was pregnant. That you built a very successful business and became someone important in the world. That you never knew about her existence, not because I deliberately hid her, but because our lives moved in different directions. The version she had presented was generous, glossing over his systematic unavailability and the depth of his abandonment. She had spared their daughter the knowledge that her father had been emotionally unreachable, had prioritized work over every human relationship, had demonstrated through action that love ranked below ambition in his hierarchy of values. You have been kind to me in your explanations, Rowan said, his voice carrying genuine gratitude beneath the observation. More kind than I deserve. I was not being kind to you, Vivienne corrected with surgical precision. I was being kind to Iris. She did not need to carry the weight of your emotional limitations as part of her origin story. Children internalize their parents' failures as commentary on their own worth. I have spent 5 years ensuring she knows she is wanted, valued, and perfect exactly as she is. I was not going to undermine that foundation by explaining that her father was incapable of the kind of love that would have kept him present. The assessment was brutal and accurate, delivered with the cold precision of someone who had spent years analyzing his failures from every angle. She understood him with uncomfortable clarity, saw through his professional armor to the damaged man beneath, and had made deliberate choices to protect their daughter from the consequences of his emotional unavailability. Thunder rumbled outside, closer now. The rain began falling harder against the windows. If I'm going to allow you into Iris's life, Vivienne continued, her voice carrying the absolute authority of a mother protecting her child, you need to understand the non-negotiable requirements. She held up one finger. First, consistency. You do not get to appear when it is convenient for your schedule and disappear when work demands your attention. Either you commit to being present, or you stay away entirely. Iris will not be subjected to the kind of intermittent reinforcement that teaches children they are only valuable when convenient. Rowan nodded. The condition struck at the heart of his historical failures. Second, she held up another finger. Boundaries. I am married to Tobias. He is Iris's father in every meaningful sense. He is the one who walks her to school, reads her bedtime stories, teaches her to navigate the world. You are her biological father, and potentially a significant adult in her life, but you do not get to undermine the family structure we have built. If you cannot respect Tobias's role, then this conversation ends now. Another nod. This one coming with more difficulty. Accepting that another man occupied the primary parental role his genetics suggested should be his required swallowing pride he was not certain he possessed. Third. Vivienne's expression hardened. Therapy. You will work with a professional to address the emotional patterns that destroyed our relationship and have apparently defined your entire adult life. I will not allow Iris to form an attachment to someone who is incapable of healthy emotional connection. You want to be her father? Prove you can become someone worthy of that role. The requirement was humiliating and absolutely reasonable. Acknowledging that his presence in Iris's life posed psychological risks that needed to be professionally managed. He had spent his entire adult life avoiding the kind of therapeutic intervention that might have prevented his transformation into his father's emotional clone. I agree to all your terms, Rowan said, the words emerging with the weight of a vow rather than a negotiation. I will do whatever it takes to become someone worthy of being in her life. Vivienne studied him for several heartbeats, her expression unreadable. Then, with the kind of decisive movement that marked all her choices, she pulled her phone from her small evening bag. She scrolled through photos and turned the screen to face him. The image showed Iris at what appeared to be her 5th birthday party, surrounded by presents and wearing a crown made of flowers. Her smile was radiant, her joy uncomplicated by the adult complexities swirling around her origins. Tobias was visible in the background, captured mid-laugh at something Iris had said. This is what you missed, Vivienne said quietly, her voice carrying grief beneath the surface calm. 5 years of moments like this. 5 birthday parties. Countless bedtime stories. The first time she wrote her name. Her first day of school. The night she learned to ride her bicycle. Every milestone, every triumph, every moment of simple joy. You were not there for any of it. The catalogue of absences struck with devastating precision. Each missed moment representing an irreplaceable piece of Iris's childhood that he would never recover. He had been building his empire while his daughter was learning to walk. Acquiring companies while she was learning to read. Closing deals while she was developing the personality and interests that made her uniquely herself. I cannot give you back those years, Vivienne continued, her amber eyes holding his with uncomfortable intensity. Cannot undo the fact that you were not present for the foundation of her life. But I can give you the opportunity to be present for her future. If you can prove you are capable of showing up for something more important than your next acquisition. Before Rowan could formulate a response, a small voice from the library doorway shattered the adult conversation with the perfect timing that children seem to possess for interrupting significant moments. Mummy. Iris stood in the doorway in her flower girl dress, her dark curls slightly disheveled from an evening of celebration. She looked between the three adults with intelligent observation that suggested she sensed undercurrents she could not quite decode. Mr. Sterling said I could find you here. I wanted to say good night before you leave for your special trip. Vivienne's entire demeanor transformed instantly, her defensive armor dissolving into genuine maternal warmth. Come here, my darling girl, she said, opening her arms in invitation that Iris accepted with the absolute trust of a child who had never doubted her mother's love. As Vivienne bent to embrace their daughter, Rowan watched the intimacy of their connection with aching awareness of everything he had missed and might never fully access. They shared inside jokes, private gestures, the kind of non-verbal communication that developed through years of exclusive attachment. But then Iris's ocean eyes, his eyes, found him across the library. And she tilted her head in that distinctive gesture he recognized from his own mirror. You are the man from the photographs, she said, her voice carrying careful observation of someone solving a puzzle. Mummy showed me pictures and said you were very important to her once. Once. Past tense. A relationship relegated to history rather than ongoing significance. Your mummy was very important to me too, Rowan replied, his voice rougher than he intended. Still is. Iris considered this with serious contemplation that 5-year-olds brought to information that might reshape their understanding of the world. Then, with the directness that characterized young children before social conditioning taught them to soften uncomfortable questions, she asked the thing that would change everything. Are you my daddy? My biological daddy, I mean. Not like Mr. Sterling, who is my daddy because he loves Mummy and me. The other kind. The question struck Rowan with the force of a physical blow, stealing his breath and threatening to overwhelm the fragile emotional control he had been maintaining throughout this entire surreal evening. His daughter, brilliant, perceptive, devastating in her innocent clarity, had identified the exact nature of their connection without prompting. He looked to Vivienne, silently asking permission to answer. She held his gaze for several heartbeats, then gave a small nod that granted him this moment of acknowledgement. Rowan dropped to his knees, bringing himself to eye level with the child who possessed his features and apparently his analytical mind. Yes, he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute truth. I am your biological father, Iris. I only learned about you today, and I am very, very sorry I have not been part of your life until now. She studied him with unnerving intensity, those ocean eyes cataloguing every detail of his appearance with the same systematic thoroughness he applied to due diligence. Do you want to be part of my life now? She asked with the directness that adults often forgot children possessed. More than anything, Rowan replied, tears threatening to overwhelm his usually impeccable composure. If you and your mummy will give me that chance. Iris considered this with the gravity of someone making important decisions about allowing new people into her carefully constructed world. Then, with the kind of generosity that suggested Vivienne had raised her to extend grace even to those who might not deserve it, she said something that would stay with Rowan for the rest of his life. Okay. But you have to promise not to make Mummy cry. Mr. Sterling never makes her cry. He makes her laugh instead. The condition was simultaneously heartbreaking and absolutely reasonable, establishing that Iris would judge him based on his treatment of the person she loved most in the world. She was offering provisional acceptance while making clear that his presence was contingent on not damaging the family structure that provided her security. I promise to do my very best, Rowan said, the vow emerging with the weight of a binding contract rather than empty words. Iris seemed satisfied with this response. She offered him a small smile that transformed her serious expression into something approaching warmth. Good. Because Mummy deserves to be happy, and Mr. Sterling is very good at making her happy. But I think there might be room for you too, if you learn how. If you learn how. The assessment from a 5-year-old was simultaneously devastating and oddly hopeful. Acknowledging his current limitations while suggesting that transformation was possible if he was willing to undertake the work. As Vivienne guided Iris out of the library to complete their goodnight routine, she paused at the doorway and looked back at Rowan. Her expression defied easy categorization. Part warning, part acknowledgement, part something that might have been the faintest trace of the connection they had once shared. "Do not make me regret this," she said quietly. "Do not make me explain to our daughter why I gave her biological father a chance and he disappointed her. Because if you hurt her, Rowan, I will ensure you regret it for the rest of your life." The threat was delivered with absolute sincerity, backed by the fierce protectiveness of a mother who had raised a child alone through every challenge and would not hesitate to eliminate threats to her daughter's well-being. "I will not," Rowan replied, though he suspected both of them knew he was making promises about capabilities he had not yet developed, vowing to become someone he had never successfully been. After they left, Tobias approached and extended his hand with serious formality that marked significant moments between brothers who had survived trials that would have destroyed lesser friendships. "Welcome to fatherhood," he said as Rowan accepted the handshake. "Fair warning. It is harder than building empires and more rewarding than any acquisition you will ever complete. That little girl will destroy and rebuild you in ways you cannot imagine. And if you let her, she will teach you how to be fully human." The words settled over Rowan like a benediction and a challenge both. As he stood alone in the library while the wedding celebration continued without him, he confronted a truth that 6 years of empire building had tried to suppress. He had spent his entire adult life running from vulnerability, only to discover that the fortress he had constructed was actually a prison that kept out everything that made life worth living. He had lost Vivienne to a better man. He had missed 5 years of his daughter's life. He had built an empire of wealth and influence while becoming emotionally bankrupt. But perhaps, just perhaps, if he could find the courage to become someone different, there might be a place for him in their lives. Not as the primary father Tobias had earned the right to be, but as a significant presence who contributed something valuable to Iris's understanding of herself and the world. It would not be the family he had destroyed 6 years ago. It would not erase the years of absence or undo the damage his abandonment had caused. But it might be enough to transform him from a stranger in photographs to a father his daughter could choose to know and perhaps, eventually, trust. 3 weeks later, Rowan sat in Dr. Catherine Okonkwo's office, watching rain streak down the windows while his therapist studied him with a kind of perceptive intelligence that made deflection impossible. The office was modern, comfortable but professional. Abstract art on the walls that reminded him painfully of Vivienne's early work. "You are here because you want access to your daughter," Dr. Okonkwo said. Her accent carried traces of Lagos beneath the polish of Cambridge education. "But she deserves a father who is emotionally whole, not just financially capable. Are you willing to do the work, or just check a box?" "I am willing," Rowan replied. "Then tell me about your father." He had been expecting the question, but it still landed with uncomfortable weight. Malcolm Castellano had been a titan of industry. Brilliant, ruthless, emotionally unavailable. He had built a manufacturing empire through strategic brilliance and absolute dedication to work above all else, including his family. He was successful, Rowan said carefully. Very successful. Everything he touched turned to profit. And as a father, the question hung in the air between them. Rowan thought about the man who had raised him with impossible standards and minimal affection, who had responded to good grades with expectations of better ones, who had missed every school play, every football match, every moment that mattered because work always mattered more. He was present physically, Rowan said finally. He lived in the house, sat at the dinner table, but he was never really there. His mind was always on the next deal, the next acquisition, the next thing that needed conquering. Dr. Okonkwo made a note. "And your mother?" "She tried," Rowan said, his voice tightening. "She tried so hard to make him see her, to make him prioritize the family. But he could not, or would not. I am still not sure which. What happened to her?" The question he had been avoiding. Rowan stared out the window, watching London's ocean sky weep rain against the glass. "She took pills," he said quietly. "Prescription medication for anxiety and depression. One night when I was 19, she took too many. I found her in the morning. I am sorry. My father did not even take time off work for the funeral. He gave the eulogy between conference calls. Dr. Okonkwo set down her pen and leaned forward slightly. And now you have discovered you have a daughter. A child you did not know existed. How does that make you feel? Terrified, Rowan admitted, the honesty emerging before he could construct more palatable lies. I am terrified that I am exactly like him. That I will damage her the way he damaged me. That I will prioritize work over her well-being and create the same cycle of emotional unavailability that destroyed my family. But you are here. I am here. That is a start. Your father would not have sought therapy. Would not have acknowledged that his patterns were harmful. The fact that you recognize the problem means you are already different. Am I? Or am I just performing difference because I want access to something I have been denied? Dr. Okonkwo smiled slightly. That is the question you will answer over the coming months. Through work. Through honesty. Through the willingness to confront parts of yourself that you have spent decades avoiding. The sessions continued twice a week. Homework assignments that felt harder than any business deal. Journaling about emotions he had spent his life suppressing. Practicing vulnerability in low-stakes situations. Reading about attachment theory and healthy parenting. The work was excruciating. But he persisted. The first Saturday visit happened 4 weeks after the wedding. Rowan arrived at Vivienne and Tobias's London townhouse with his heart performing gymnastics his doctors would find concerning. The house was elegant without being ostentatious. Georgian architecture. A small garden. The kind of place that whispered old money rather than screaming new wealth. Vivienne answered the door. She had agreed to supervised visits. 1 hour each Saturday. In her home where Iris felt safe. With clear boundaries about what was and was not appropriate conversation. Come in, she said, her tone professionally cordial. She is expecting you. Iris was in the drawing room, working on a painting at a small easel that had been set up near the windows. She looked up when he entered, and for a moment, Rowan forgot how to breathe. His daughter. In person, without the buffer of a wedding celebration or adult confrontations. Just her, in a purple jumper with paint on her hands and curiosity in her ocean eyes. Hello, Iris, he said, his voice coming out rougher than intended. Hello, she replied politely. Mummy says you are going to visit on Saturdays. If that is acceptable to you. She considered this with the seriousness of someone making important decisions. What will we do during visits? Whatever you would like, Rowan said, taking the seat Vivienne indicated across from Iris's easel. We could talk. Or I could watch you paint. Or you could tell me about things you enjoy. I like mathematics and art, Iris said matter-of-factly. And reading. And I am learning to play piano. Those all sound wonderful. The first visit was awkward. Stilted conversation. Long pauses. Rowan had no idea how to talk to 5-year-olds, and his boardroom skills were useless here. But Iris was patient. She showed him her painting. Explained the geometric patterns she was incorporating. Asked him surprisingly sophisticated questions about his work. And slowly, tentatively, they began to find common ground. The second visit, 2 weeks later, was slightly less awkward. Iris showed him a painting she had made of the solar system, with planets arranged according to mathematical proportions. I used the golden ratio, she explained, pointing to the spacing between celestial bodies. It makes the composition feel balanced even though the planets are different sizes. Rowan stared at the work of a 5-year-old who was discussing concepts that challenged most adults. This is remarkable, he said with genuine admiration. Mummy taught me that nature uses mathematical patterns to create beauty, Iris continued. Like Fibonacci sequences in flowers. Or fractals in snowflakes. Your mummy is very wise. I know. The simple confidence in her voice made him smile. Vivienne observed from the doorway, her expression carefully neutral but not hostile. Tobias joined them briefly, easy and natural with Iris in a way that made Rowan both grateful and envious. How was school this week? Tobias asked, sitting on the floor beside Iris's easel. We learned about fractions, Iris said. They are quite simple once you understand that you are dividing a whole into equal parts. Of course they are, Tobias replied with warmth. Because you are brilliant. The interaction was comfortable. Practiced. The rhythm of a relationship built through years of presence. Rowan was the outsider looking in. But for the first time, he felt something other than resentment about Tobias's position in Iris's life. He felt gratitude. Gratitude that his daughter had been loved so completely. That she had never lacked for affection or attention. That Tobias had filled the void Rowan's absence had created. "Thank you," he said quietly as Tobias stood to leave them to their visit. Tobias paused, meeting his gaze with understanding. "She is easy to love," Tobias replied simply. "You will see." The third visit, 1 month in, was the first time Iris laughed in his presence. They were discussing mathematical patterns in business, and Rowan had made an offhand comment about how market fluctuations sometimes resembled fractals. Iris's eyes had lit up. "So the stock market is like a snowflake?" she asked. "In a way. Patterns that repeat at different scales. Complexity that emerges from simple rules." "That is brilliant," she said, and then she laughed. The sound was pure and unself-conscious, and it struck Rowan with the force of revelation. This was what he had been missing. Not just milestones and achievements, but joy. Simple, uncomplicated joy that came from connection with another human being. Vivienne's expression softened slightly from her position on the sofa where she supervised all visits. Maybe, possibly, this could work. 8 weeks after the wedding, Dr. Okonkwo asked Vivienne to join them for a session. Rowan had been dreading it. But Vivienne arrived with professional composure and took the seat across from him without hesitation. "Thank you for coming," Dr. Okonkwo said. "I have asked you here to provide context about your relationship with Rowan and how it ended. He has given his perspective, but I would like to hear yours." Vivienne nodded. Then, with the kind of devastating honesty that had always characterized her, she began to speak. "Rowan was capable of passion but not presence," she said. "He could be intense but never consistent. When we were together, when he was focused on me, it felt like standing in sunlight. But the moment work called, I ceased to exist. I never doubted he cared. I doubted I mattered enough." The words landed like precision strikes. "When I found out I was pregnant," she continued, "I tried to tell him. I sent letters to his office. Called his private line. Even flew to Singapore. But his assistant screened the letters. His voicemail was full. His security turned me away with instructions that he was not to be disturbed under any circumstances. I did not know," Rowan said, his voice breaking. "I know that now," Vivienne replied, her amber eyes meeting his without anger. "But at the time, it felt like confirmation of what I already knew. That I was not important enough to reach you. That work would always matter more than people." She paused, gathering herself. "So I made the decision to raise Iris alone. Not to punish you, but to protect her from a father who had already demonstrated that his priorities lay elsewhere. Children know when they are not wanted. When they are inconvenient. I was not going to subject her to that." Dr. Okonkwo made notes, then turned to Rowan. "What do you hear her saying?" "That I created the circumstances of my own isolation," Rowan said quietly. "That my systematic unavailability was not accidental but deliberate. That I built walls so high that even someone trying to reach me with life-changing information could not get through. And what does that tell you about the patterns you have been operating under? That they are the same patterns that destroyed my parents' marriage. The same emotional unavailability that killed my mother. I became exactly what I swore I would never be." The session continued for another hour. Painful. Necessary. Forcing Rowan to confront exactly how his fear of vulnerability had destroyed the best thing in his life. But when it ended, Vivienne paused at the door. "You are trying," she said quietly. "Really trying. That matters." It was not forgiveness. But it was acknowledgement. And for now, that was enough. 3 months after the wedding, Iris's school held a recital. Students reading poems and short stories they had written. Iris had been practicing for weeks. Rowan received the invitation via email from Vivienne. "Iris would like you to attend, if you are available. Tobias and I will be there. We have reserved a seat for you with the family." The family. He was being included in that designation. The recital was held in the school's small auditorium. Rowan arrived early, nervous in a way that billion-pound deals had never made him. Vivienne and Tobias were already seated in the third row. Vivienne gestured to the empty seat beside her. Rowan sat, acutely aware of the surreal nature of this moment. Sitting beside his ex-girlfriend and her husband at their daughter's school event. "She has been so excited," Vivienne said quietly. "This is the first time you will see her perform. I would not miss it." When Iris took the stage in her school uniform, Rowan felt his chest constrict with emotion he could not name. Pride, grief, wonder, all of it tangled together. She read a poem she had written titled Patterns in Nature. It was about Fibonacci sequences in flowers. Mathematical precision meets artistic beauty. Her voice was clear and confident, and she was extraordinary. When she finished, the audience applauded. But Iris's eyes searched the crowd until they found their family. First Tobias, her safe person. Then Vivienne, her anchor. Then Rowan. And she smiled. A real smile, just for him. Acknowledging that his presence mattered to her. Rowan had to look away to compose himself. After the recital, Iris ran to them. She hugged Tobias first, then Vivienne. Then, tentatively, she offered Rowan a hug. He knelt and accepted it with reverence. "You were magnificent," he said. "Did you like the math parts?" she asked. "I loved the math parts. And the poetry. Mummy helped with the poetry. But the math was all me." There was pride in her voice. She knew she was brilliant. Vivienne's phone appeared. "Let us take a picture," she said. They arranged themselves. Vivienne, Tobias, Iris, and Rowan. A family portrait that defied conventional definition. But a family nonetheless. 6 months after the wedding, Rowan sat in the elegant drawing room of Vivienne and Tobias's townhouse, watching Iris explain the mathematical principles behind the geometric painting she was creating. Saturday visits had become routine now. Expected. Anticipated. He arrived with her favorite pastries from the bakery near his office. She greeted him with genuine warmth. They had developed inside jokes. Shared interests. The beginnings of trust. "See," Iris said, pointing to a pattern of intersecting triangles. "If you use the Fibonacci sequence as your structural guide, the composition feels balanced even when it is asymmetrical. Mummy taught me that." "That is remarkable," Rowan said with genuine admiration. "You have inherited your mother's artistic vision, and what I am told is my analytical mind." "Mr. Sterling says I got the best parts of both of you," Iris replied casually. The comment no longer struck Rowan with jealous pain. Instead, he felt gratitude that another man loved his daughter enough to celebrate her origins rather than compete with them. Vivienne appeared in the doorway with tea. Her presence still affected Rowan's nervous system, but 6 months of deliberate therapy had helped him process those feelings without being controlled by them. "How is the mathematical art tutorial progressing?" she asked, settling into the chair across from where Rowan sat today. "She is brilliant," Rowan replied. "Absolutely brilliant. She gets that from both of us," Vivienne said with generous acknowledgement. After Iris went to the garden to check on her math garden, flowers planted in a Fibonacci spiral, Vivienne turned to Rowan with an expression he could not quite read. "You have kept every promise you made," she said quietly. "The consistency. The boundaries. The therapy. I did not think you could do it. I am glad I was wrong. Thank you for giving me the chance." They sat in comfortable silence. A thing that would have been impossible 6 months ago. "Do you still love her?" Vivienne asked suddenly. "Direct. No games." "Always will, in a way," Rowan admitted. "But I love the woman I remember. You have become someone new. Someone stronger. That woman belongs with Tobias. And I am grateful he is the man raising our daughter." Vivienne's expression softened. "I needed to hear that. Needed to know you were not harboring fantasies about reclaiming what was lost." "What we had was real," Rowan said. "But it was also built on a foundation of my emotional unavailability. We are better as co-parents than we ever were as partners. And that is okay." Vivienne smiled. A real smile, the first one she had given him in 6 years. "We made something extraordinary," Rowan said, looking toward the garden where Iris was carefully measuring distances between flower beds. "The best thing I have ever been part of creating." Even though I almost missed it entirely. She is pretty extraordinary, Vivienne agreed. That evening, Rowan sat in his penthouse office, looking out at the same view that had once represented everything he valued. The city glittered below him. His empire hummed along, generating wealth and influence. But for the first time in his adult life, it was not enough. Because he had tasted something more valuable than any acquisition. Connection. Real, messy, complicated human connection with a little girl who was teaching him how to be present rather than just powerful. His phone buzzed with a message. From Iris. Vivienne had given her a tablet for educational purposes, and she had started sending him pictures of interesting mathematical patterns she found in everyday life. This message contained a photo of a spiderweb covered in morning dew. Look at the geometric precision, she had written. Nature is the best mathematician. Rowan smiled and typed back. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing this with me. 3 dots appeared. Then her response. See you next Saturday. Always, he replied. And he meant it. 1 year after the wedding, Dr. Okonkwo asked Rowan to write a letter to Iris. Not to give her now, but for when she was older. When she had harder questions about his absence. Dear Iris, he wrote. I want you to know the truth about who I was and who I am trying to become. When you were born, I did not know you existed. Not because your mother hid you from me, but because I had made myself unreachable. I had built walls so high around my life that even someone with life-changing news could not get through. I did this because I was afraid. Afraid of vulnerability. Afraid of needing someone so much that losing them could break me. My own father taught me that emotional availability was weakness, and I spent my entire adult life proving I could be just as successful and just as isolated as he was. It cost me everything that mattered. I missed the first 5 years of your life. Your first words. Your first steps. The first time you wrote your name. Every birthday party. Every milestone. Those years are gone, and I cannot get them back. But I can promise you this. From the moment I learned about you, I have been trying to become someone worthy of knowing you. Not to erase the past. That is impossible. But to build a future where you know you can count on me. You have a father who has been there since the beginning. Tobias loves you with his whole heart, and he has earned his place in your life through presence and devotion. I will never try to replace him or diminish what he means to you. But I hope there is room for me too. As your biological father. As someone who is learning, slowly and imperfectly, how to show up consistently. How to prioritize people over achievements. How to be emotionally available instead of just financially capable. If I fail, it will not be because I did not try with everything I have. I love you, Iris. I loved you the moment I saw you, and I will love you for the rest of my life. Your father, Rowan. He showed the letter to Vivienne during his next visit. She read it in silence, tears gathering in her eyes. This is exactly what she will need when she is older, she said quietly. Thank you for being honest. Rowan folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope. Vivienne would keep it safe until Iris was ready. The Saturday ritual continued. Week after week. Month after month. Rowan arrived at the townhouse with pastries or books or interesting puzzles he thought Iris might enjoy. They talked about mathematics and art and the patterns that connected everything in the universe. They took walks in the park, Iris's small hand in his, talking about everything and nothing. Slowly, incrementally, they built something that looked like a relationship. Not perfect. Still developing. But real. One afternoon, as they sat in the garden watching butterflies navigate between flowers, Iris asked the question Rowan had been both dreading and hoping for. Do you wish you had been there from the beginning? Every day, he admitted. Every single day. Why were you not? Because I made terrible choices, Iris. I prioritized my work over everything else. Over your mother. Over the possibility of family. Over the chance to know you from the very start. She processed this with the serious contemplation that characterized all her thinking. But you are here now. I am here now. And you keep coming back. Every Saturday. Every Saturday. Without fail. She nodded, satisfied. Then that is what matters. Not what happened before. But what happens now. The wisdom from a 6-year-old struck him with the force of revelation. Not what happened before, but what happens now. You are very wise, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I know, she replied with the casual confidence of a child who had been told she was brilliant her entire life. Then she returned her attention to the butterflies, and Rowan sat beside her, grateful beyond words for the grace of a child who had chosen to give him a chance he had done nothing to earn. 2 years after the wedding, Rowan sat in his office, looking at the photograph that now held pride of place on his desk. Iris at her 7th birthday party, surrounded by family. Tobias and Vivienne on either side of her. And Rowan there too, included in the frame. His empire was still successful. His business still thrived. But it was no longer the only thing that defined him. He was also a father. Imperfect. Still learning. Making mistakes and apologizing and trying again. But present. Consistently, reliably present in his daughter's life. He had learned to say no to deals that would take him away from Saturday visits. Had restructured his schedule around Iris's school events. Had prioritized presence over profit in ways that his younger self would have considered weakness. But it was not weakness. It was the hardest, most important work he had ever done. His phone rang. Iris, calling from Vivienne's mobile. Hello, sweetheart, he answered. Rowan, she said, and he smiled at her continued formality. She had never called him dad or father. Just Rowan. And that was fine. I have a question about prime numbers. Of course you do. What is the question? They talked for 20 minutes about mathematical theory while Rowan pulled up resources on his computer to help explain concepts even he barely understood. This was fatherhood. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts. But showing up. Answering questions. Being reliably present. When they hung up, Rowan returned to the photograph on his desk. His daughter, brilliant and kind and generous enough to let a stranger become part of her life. The woman he had loved and lost, who had built something beautiful from the ruins he had left behind. The man who had been wise enough to love them both well. And himself, learning slowly how to be human. It was not the family he had destroyed 6 years ago. It was not the triumphant reclamation of everything he had lost. But it was something more valuable than he had had any right to expect. A second chance. Earned through humility rather than claimed through entitlement. To be part of the most extraordinary little girl's life. And perhaps, if he continued doing the difficult work of becoming someone different, that would be enough. Some men build empires to fill the void where love once lived. Rowan Castellano had learned that the greatest empire he could build was not made of wealth or influence or power. It was made of trust. Earned one consistent action at a time. One Saturday visit at a time. One answered phone call, one attended recital, one conversation about prime numbers at a time. He had lost 5 years that could never be recovered. But he had been given the gift of every year that followed. And that, more than any acquisition, any deal, any business triumph, was the greatest achievement of his life. Not because he deserved it, but because a little girl with ocean eyes and a generous heart had decided he was worth the chance. And he would spend the rest of his life proving she was right. If you are watching this and you have been chasing success while neglecting the people who matter most, let this story be your warning. Empires can be rebuilt. Fortunes can be remade. Deals can be renegotiated. But time with the people you love is the one resource you can never buy back. Rowan missed 5 years of his daughter's life. 5 years he can never recover. 5 birthdays, 5 Christmases, 5 years of bedtime stories and scraped knees and first words. Gone. He got a second chance, but it came at a price. Humility, therapy, hard work, consistent presence, and the acceptance that he would never be her primary father. That role belonged to the man who showed up when Rowan was too busy building his empire. The question you have to ask yourself is this. What are you sacrificing in pursuit of success? And will you realize too late that you traded everything that mattered for things that ultimately mean nothing at all? Do not make Rowan's mistake. Do not build a fortress of success while locking yourself away from the people who could make your life meaningful. Do not prioritize achievements over connection. Do not convince yourself that you will have time later, because later may be too late. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own priorities, I want you to do something right now. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Comment below and tell me what you are going to change in your own life after hearing Rowan's story. And subscribe to Tales of Desire with Mr. Walker, because every week we bring you stories that do not just entertain, but transform. Stories that challenge you, move you, and remind you what it means to be fully human. Remember this. Life's greatest treasures are not built in boardrooms. They are built in quiet moments with the people who matter most. Do not realize too late what truly matters. This is Mr. Walker, reminding you that every ending is also a beginning. If you are brave enough to change. Thank you for listening. And may you find the courage to show up for the people who need you, before it is too late. The end.